Rebosa was beyond just irritated with Raleigh and the other aristocrats. The late Uriel was starting to irritate him even more. The bishop fumed internally, questioning how Uriel had the audacity to speak of his prayers to a stranger. Enraged, he shouted that he should have exploded Uriel's stupid head a long time ago. In his fury, the bishop began to refer to the ungrateful man as the Dark Wizard himself. At this moment, Raleigh, with a tone of curiosity and suspicion, asked what secrets were so deeply hidden that they would go so far as to kill a partner to protect them. This revelation took the swordsman by surprise. However, he quickly dismissed his curiosity, stating that he did not mind and that if Rebosa preferred to remain silent, he was free to do so. Raleigh then relaxed his grip on the cold weapon, ominously declaring that Rebosa would meet his end by his hands no matter what. With surprising agility, the sword cut through the air. Suddenly, a scream sounded, commanding Raleigh to stop. A protective field materialized in front of Rebosa, the protagonist, an exceptionally powerful swordsman, struck with such force that small cracks appeared in the protective barrier, making his presence visible and alarming Raleigh. Before them stood a white-haired elf girl, her hand magically outstretched in defense. She stood proudly, her head held high, and explained to the protagonist that Rebosa's body needed to be preserved. Raleigh, although not particularly pleased to see the elf, felt a familiar energy from her. He questioned her intention, hinting at a deeper connection, and she confirmed that she was, in fact, a dragon. The girl formally introduced herself as Isildur, the chief of dragons, with dazzlingly beautiful blue eyes. He informed Sir Raleigh that his mission was to maintain balance and control the Wheel of Destiny. Rebosa, now sitting inside the protective barrier, listened attentively to his words. Isildur continued, emphasizing the importance of keeping Rebosa alive. Raleigh pondered the concept of balance and asked if that was why she had intervened. Isildur stated this, explaining that while it was logical to extract information from Rebosa first before considering his elimination, it was crucial to think long-term. Raleigh interrupted her, stating that he did not want to comply. He insisted that it was his responsibility to explain his actions. He revealed that Rebosa had recently resurrected a goat he had killed, questioning why he should allow Rebosa to get away with it. Isildur countered that killing Rebosa now could bring peace for the next 100 years, but she could not guarantee a good future beyond that period. She urged Raleigh to consider the future of humanity, suggesting that saving Rebosa was a strategic move. Raleigh, with a slight smile, asked if peace would really last 100 years. Isildur confirmed that this had happened in the past, and this time they intended to prevent future chaos by acting wisely now. Without further hesitation, Raleigh attacked the protective barrier around the bishop, taking Isildur by surprise. She quickly extended her arms to reinforce the barrier. Raleigh reasoned out loud, declaring that since the problem would arise within the next 100 years, it would be up to the people of that time to deal with it. He would choose to live in peace, stabbing his sword into the barrier. Isildur, observing Raleigh, thought he looked like an ordinary person, but he felt an extraordinary amount of mana within him, far more than any ordinary man should possess. She knew she needed to stop Raleigh before he broke through the barrier completely. The elf girl raised her hand, and it seemed as if magical currents began to swirl around her. She did not wish to harm him, so she begged him, shouting for him to put down his sword for the sake of the future. In an instant, chains materialized and wrapped around Raleigh, binding his hands and feet. Isildur assured Raleigh that what he was seeking would only grant him peace, which would only be a temporary illusion. Raleigh, seething with frustration at the sudden turn of events, gritted his teeth, his anger evident. He decided to unleash his full power, activating his red mana. Her energy fiercely clashed against the elf girl's magical chains, painting the air around them a vivid red. Isildur watched in awe as Raleigh's formidable power manifested. Raleigh's sword began to cut through the magical chains, defying his efforts. He declared that he no longer had the patience for these interruptions. Finally, he turned directly to Isildur, telling her that he was completely alone and exhausted. Isildur, visibly distressed, shouted for the swordsman to stop and reconsider his action. The elf girl was anxious, but recognizing Raleigh's immense strength, she dared not approach him. Raleigh, unfazed, had already reached the barrier for the second time. His eyes glowed with a murderous red intensity, reminiscent of the Ipiet family. Rebosa, observing the chaos, expressed his disappointment in Raleigh for awakening him so prematurely. A menacing figure with a terrifying wide smile emerged. Suddenly, something long and black knocked the frightened Isildur down, hitting her hard in the back, making her scream in pain. This entity advanced towards Raleigh, who was now also filled with dread, although he struggled to understand what was happening. Despite the confusion and lack of information, Raleigh managed to fight off the monstrous hand. That hand was enormous, matching Raleigh's impressive height. He questioned the hand, demanding to know what it was. The hand was not only large, but also immensely strong. The pressure of the hand threatened to break Raleigh's once mighty sword. Under the strain, Raleigh's sword broke in two, leaving him defenseless. The massive hand then passed through Raleigh, Grabbing Bishop Rebosa tightly, pulling him out of the protective barrier, a portal began to open, and the hand intended to take the bishop through it. Realizing what was happening, Raleigh sprang into action, running after them and demanding to know where the bishop was being taken. Suddenly, the silhouette of a man with an intimidating smile appeared before Raleigh. He sat calmly across from the protagonist, smiling and asking if Raleigh was present. The stranger's words echoed, questioning whether Raleigh was still haunted by something from his past life, which shocked Raleigh, revealing his true identity as Beck. In the past, Beck had intervened. The stranger confirmed, expressing awe and comparing the experience to traveling back in time to a world where Raleigh, like Beck, was either a savior or something more. The stranger, in a twisted form of gratitude, mentioned having seen a delightful vision thanks to Raleigh and promised to give him a gift. With a swift movement, the stranger's fist, glowing with a purple hue, rushed forward at an angle, hitting Raleigh with tremendous force. Raleigh barely had time to react before the blow landed, knocking him down and leaving him dazed and vulnerable. Blood ran from Raleigh's mouth, and he had to cough a little to clear it. The blow had been incredibly powerful, leaving Raleigh completely depleted of mana and feeling like a rag doll being tossed around. When Rebosa was absorbed into the portal, Isilta managed to wrap her magical chains around the strange monster's arm. Out of nowhere, Endal came running around the corner, rushing to Isilta's side and asking if she was okay. She didn't have time to respond. His mind was consumed by the urgent need to stop the portal from closing. At that moment, Nani entered the fray, activating her black mana in a desperate attempt to help. The monster's fist was huge, but that was all they had time to register before the portal closed. Nani wondered aloud if they had really disappeared. Isilta collapsed into Endal's arms, exhausted from her efforts. Endal turned to Nani, asking if she could see where they went. Nani replied that he was now searching, his concentration palpable and intense. She opened her wide eyes slightly, focusing with such intensity that it was almost terrifying. Suddenly, Nani felt as if she saw something clearly. She was surprised because she saw a road, cars, and a completely unfamiliar environment. However, she also noticed the tall, reflective structures around her. This place mirrored the nightmarish visions Lord Raleigh had seen. But as she realized, it wasn't just similar, it was exactly the same. Nani was now in that same environment, surrounded by tall glass buildings, paved roads, and trees planted along the streets. She saw school children, students, and office workers moving around the city, which was totally foreign to her. This cityscape was eerily similar to Raleigh's nightmares. She pondered this underworld and the Lord's strange dreams, realizing that he was hiding something significant. Standing on the side of the road, Nani spotted the silhouette of a man in a coat Beck. She stared at him, feeling a growing fear. Meanwhile, Raleigh emerged from the hole where he had been thrown by the mysterious fist. He rubbed his neck and complained of a throbbing headache. He was about to curse the bastard responsible, but then he realized he was alone and wondered where everyone had gone. The protagonist was covered in bruises. Endal hugged Isilta, laughing as he asked if the young gentleman was still alive. He joked that Raleigh's skull must have been strong, probably because it was empty. Although Endal found his own joke amusing, neither Isilta nor Raleigh appreciated it. The swordsman, irritated, asked who Endal was calling Hollowhead and threatened to sew Endal's mouth shut. Raleigh managed to compose himself, taking a deep breath to calm his nerves. He commented that they had already passed that stage. With a determined stride, he approached Nani, asking if she had ever met that kind of person before. The girl remained silent, her eyes reflecting a mix of fear and uncertainty. Then, without warning, she grabbed Raleigh's hand and said she had something important to share. Raleigh looked at her intently, and she began to tell him of a dream she had had. In her dream, she witnessed incredible things, strange little cars with black wheels, which she later understood to be automobiles, tall buildings like the magical towers of her world, modern houses and offices. The ground was covered with a black, gravel-like substance, and people were fighting terrifying monsters, red, horned demons unlike anything she had ever seen. Nani explained that the dream seemed too real to be just a figment of her imagination. She vividly remembered a man crying in the dream. Determined to understand, she sought out the man with the black hand and saw the world of her dreams. As she loosened her grip on Raleigh's hand, she said she didn't believe it was a mere coincidence. She begged him to explain, insinuating that she had been to that place before and asking if he knew what it was. Raleigh was stunned, his mind racing with the implications of what Nani had revealed. Her insight shook him to his core. Overwhelmed by her words, Raleigh couldn't help himself and held Nani's hand tightly. Almost desperately, he lowered his head and ordered her to erase everything she had just seen from her memory. Nani was surprised by Raleigh's urgent request, her voice shaking as she addressed him. Meanwhile, someone wearing a red cloak was eavesdropping on their conversation from a distance. That person approached, advancing towards the end of the corner, and was about to enter the square. The man held a letter and document detailing the horrific atrocities committed by the fanatics of the Temple of Zoya. The letter revealed that a large number of corpses had been discovered, and the fanatics were now in custody while healers conducted a more thorough investigation. The revelation that the living corpses case was the work of religious fanatics was shocking. Those who helped the victims were being rewarded for their efforts. Raleigh, reading a newspaper, realized that this was how the situation had been resolved. He looked up from the newspaper and saw Nani, who was talking to Frisia. She mentioned feeling much better and expressed her happiness for her, showing genuine concern. Ian, sitting with them, commented that despite everything, the scar on his face had not disappeared. Nani smiled widely, saying she didn't mind. Raleigh, however, looked at the trio with a cold and indifferent expression. Nothing seemed to please him at that moment. Suddenly, Indal approached from behind and shouted Raleigh's name in his ear, startling him. Indal laughed loudly, teasing Raleigh for not listening to him and calling him princess. He joked that Raleigh should have some common sense as this issue concerned Nani's illness. Raleigh, still confused and worried, asked what Indal meant by sickness. Hadn't they already cured her? Indal's mood soured and he crossed his arms, replying that they had only alleviated the symptoms with magic. But that was not enough. They removed all the magic circles she had and had to teach her everything again, just like dragons do. Indal explained that he felt as if he needed to purge all the corruption within her. And in fact, he felt better once they cleaned out the remnants. However, he admitted that this was not the biggest problem. Pointing to his closed eye with a finger, he indicated that the real problem was there. Raleigh immediately understood that he was referring to Nani's right eye. Indal elaborated that although they could renew his body by replacing it with new energy, the eyes were another story. The eyes were like a complex web of tangled threads, prone to rot. If they made a mistake in handling these threads, not only would Nani not be cured, but as long as she remained human, she would not be able to endure the process. However, if she were reborn into a more resilient form, she might survive. Raleigh realized that this world was not advanced enough to replace an amputated limb with a prosthetic. Overwhelmed and stressed, Raleigh asked what form she would need to be reborn into to survive. Indal explained that she would have to completely abandon her human form. He then asked Raleigh if he understood that Nani's fate was in his hands, whether she would die or be reborn. The third son, deeply disturbed, lowered his head and asked what would happen if Nani gave up her human form. This prospect intrigued him greatly. Indal snapped his fingers, summoning a small but powerful fire. From it emerged a small and charming fire fairy. She was not a terrifying beast, but a cute little fairy named Eliona who served the red dragon. The fairy flew around Raleigh's head, surprising him with her presence. Indal explained that if Nani was reborn, she would become a creature like Eliona, an artificially created spirit. Eliona, originally a spirit, continued to zigzag around Raleigh, lying on his hair, seemingly weightless. Indal commented that being a lord was true, to which Nani disagreed, saying that Raleigh didn't look particularly handsome and that she didn't understand what he saw in her. She commented that she thought he would seem sweeter and friendlier, a remark that Raleigh did not appreciate. Raleigh tried to grab Eliona with his hand, but she let out a scream, covering her face with her small hands before quickly hiding behind Indal. The dragon laughed, explaining to Raleigh that he couldn't take her because she wasn't fully material. Indal mentioned that this was a quirk of these spirits, and if he started explaining now, it would take forever to cover everything. Eliona, now perched on his shoulder, gently stroked his cheek and asked what was bothering him. Nani, hearing Indal scream, turned her head. Indal, his face red with anger, shouted that if she were not the daughter of the Spirit King, she would be in serious trouble. Finally, he turned his attention to Raleigh, sat down at his desk, and asked if Raleigh understood the gravity of what he was explaining. He mentioned that these little creatures retained all of their human memories and traits when they were reborn. Raleigh, with a skeptical expression, asked if Indal was sure there was anything good left. He doubted it. Indal replied that, in fact, they also had their flaws. He explained that, to maintain their essence, mana needed to constantly flow within them, and that artificial spirits should avoid ordinary spirits, as the latter did not like them. Indal reassured Raleigh, pointing his finger and telling him not to worry about the mana. He added that if Nani bonded with a high-class spirit like Eliona, she would not face any problems with pure blood spirits. Raleigh asked if this was really true, but Indal did not answer directly. Instead, Raleigh continued, saying that in that case, Nani should be fine. Raleigh seemed indifferent, casting a suspicious glance at his maid. Indal then slammed his hand on the table, emphasizing his point. He was about to leave when Raleigh asked him where he was going. Indal replied that he was heading west for a while as he suspected something was wrong there. Eliona, curious, asked her host if he was leaving yet. He confirmed, adding that he would stay with Nani as they had received permission. For some inexplicable reason, Eliona seemed delighted with this news, but Raleigh was not pleased with the fairy's excitement. He asked his companion to wait and demanded an explanation. Indal only said that they were discussing the matter, which horrified Raleigh. He couldn't believe it wasn't a dragon orchestrating all of this. Indal questioned why he should be the one responsible for dealing with this, calling Raleigh a shameless friend. Raleigh, clearly displeased, asked with a look of deep indignation why he had to do this. Endao, smiling slightly, replied that as his mentor and Raoul as his teacher, he had to take responsibility. He added that Eliona would provide the remaining details. When Endao left, the doors closing behind him, Eliona returned to her place in Raleigh's head. Raleigh, trying to imitate his calm demeanor, admitted he was speechless. Meanwhile, two men were walking through an immense desert, crossing golden sand dunes. One asked the other if it was true that he had seen him. The second man confirmed, saying he had taken control of the route and was now governing it. Both men wore black cloaks. The first commented that this was why he had missed the last meeting. He asked how the other managed to capture the dragon, noting that it was an incredible feat for a mere human. The second man agreed, recognizing that controlling a dragon was an extraordinary task for any human. As the sun slowly set over the horizon, the golden sands took on a deeper hue. Before them was a terrifying landscape filled with dry bones and remains of some unfortunate souls. A dark purple hand rolled across the floor. One of the men commented that if this was related to what the other was thinking, it could change everything. He emphasized that this time, those entities needed to be captured. The red dragon Endao appeared, with an unusually serious expression, without his usual wide smile. Santa Frisia screamed insistently, begging them to take her along. Riley responded with calm indifference, stating that he didn't want her to go. Undeterred, Frisia activated her enchantment skill, compelling those around her with a hoarse voice, and asked again. She explained that she was actually making the request on someone else's behalf, but now needed to hide her identity because the Temple of Solia had fallen. Frisia's despair was palpable, making those around her feel sorry, including the protagonist. Riley called her Honey and commented that the problem was hers to solve. He questioned why he should be responsible for fixing it. Ian, unable to resist her charm, begged the young man to help her once and for all. Nara accompanied them, encouraging him and reminding them that Frisia was the saint of Solia. Riley coldly told them that her life in the temple had been destroyed, emphasizing that no one would cater to her whims without question. His harsh words deeply disturbed the saint. Riley continued her verbal attack, questioning where they had ever seen a girl her age acting so spoiled. Without waiting for a response, he proclaimed that he was present to witness her behavior. His words hit Frisia like arrows. She was shaking with sadness, on the verge of hysteria. Suddenly, out of nowhere, Frisia screamed for forgiveness, scaring the protagonist. Between sobs, the girl admitted that she was really spoiled, and that was why her temple had fallen. She couldn't even protect her own followers. She confessed that she had thought about it a lot. She said she could survive alone, without food or water, going wherever she wanted, but she knew how to evoke pity effectively. Nara fell into her act, running to Santa Frisia and asking if she was okay. Nara reassured her, saying that she understood her master's intentions and that he said what he felt, asking her not to worry so much. Nani and Han then joined the scene, looking at Riley with a murderous intensity that even he felt uncomfortable. They demanded to know how he could make the saint cry. Riley, speechless, tried to speak, but nothing came out. Sweat of humiliation, fear and frustration ran down his face, and in the end, he had to give in. Reluctantly, he agreed that they would take her with them. Finally, the carriage arrived at the mansion of the family in Pellet. It was night, but the illuminated house stood out brightly against the darkness. The protagonist disembarked with Nara, bathed in moonlight. Raleigh asked the red-haired girl if she had carried out his orders. Nara scratched her neck and responded affirmatively. The first son hoped that his father would judge them fairly and name the rightful heir. He asked Lloyd if he shared that sentiment. Lloyd, initially confused, quickly stated yes. The first son then commented that, with Rowley's temperament, he was not fit to be the heir. He accused Rowley of hiding behind Ian and engaging in foolish behavior. These words began to irritate even Lloyd. Then the older brother remembered what he had heard about Rowley's upbringing, and his words continued to bother Lloyd. He welcomed Raleigh back, expressing relief and gratitude that he was safe. He even remembered to congratulate Raleigh, who smiled back and thanked him. Raleigh said that if that was all his brother had to say, he would go to the office. As Raleigh passed and began to distance himself from his brothers, the eldest watched him not as a brother, but as a rival. Shortly after the protagonist left, Lloyd turned to his brother, who asked what he was thinking. Lloyd responded, acknowledging Raleigh's existence. He told how, when Raleigh fought the dark and rebellious wizard, he managed to follow him, hiding behind a corner. At that time, he still didn't know why Raleigh had come to Solia, but his curiosity was intense. That didn't seem to matter now. He had seen the undead, those poor mutilated and inhuman creatures, up close. What he saw terrified him. He heard someone shout for help and someone else order them to point their swords at the enemy in defense of the great Solia. As Lloyd sank deeper into these nightmarish memories, he felt genuine sadness. It was unlikely that anyone would want to witness such horrors even once in their lifetime. Lloyd never mentioned any of this to Raleigh. Noticing Lloyd's distraught state, Raleigh asked what was wrong. Lloyd closed his eyes and denied that anything was wrong. The Count was sitting in his office when his children walked in, finally praising them for their efforts. He stated that thanks to them, the trembling Solia had managed to stand her ground again. Lion, the eldest son, smiled with pride. The Count acknowledged that Lion had helped people from many cities, even visiting places he had not mentioned. Turning to Lloyd, the Earl noted that although his second son seemed less satisfied and confident than his older brother, he had contributed significantly to saving Solia. He praised Lloyd, who bowed and thanked him, although he expressed disbelief in his own efforts and asked not to be spoken to in that way. Lloyd's behavior surprised his father, who realized that Raleigh and his team were Solia's true saviors. Finally, the father addressed his third son, Raleigh, pausing for a particularly long time. Raleigh became increasingly nervous. Despite the prolonged silence, the Count suggested that they no longer discuss the matter. Leon was jubilant, ready to celebrate his victory in the battle for the title of heir. The Count pounded the table with his fist to break his children out of their thoughts and focus their attention on it. He announced that he would reveal the heir in 2 days, based on the results of the contest, and insisted that they behave honorably during this period, without fighting among themselves. That was all he had to say. The boys left the office in procession, Raleigh first, followed by Lloyd, and Leon behind. Lloyd called Raleigh, who was a little surprised. Lloyd stared at his brother in silence, which prompted Raleigh to ask if he had anything to say. Otherwise, Raleigh said he would leave. Leon approached Lloyd, sarcastically asking if he had swallowed his tongue, noting that Lloyd didn't seem like himself today. Lloyd simply shrugged, saying that was the way it was. He put his hands in his pockets and replied that he was fine. The sky was covered in dark clouds, signaling an imminent storm. The once yellow leaves had withered and mostly fallen to the ground. The Recap mansion seemed to sink into the melancholy of an autumn day. The wind rustled the few remaining leaves attached to the branches. 2 days later, the sun finally rose, restoring Recap's mansion to its usual bright appearance. The white carriage was ready, and the horses were in their places. Nobles got out of visiting carriages, assisted by servants. The young ladies were engaged in lively discussions. An important night had begun at the mansion. The sun was setting, painting the sky in warm tones. Outside, tables adorned with flowers and candles, covered in white tablecloths, were set in anticipation. Night fell, and the sky was clear, revealing bright stars and the moon. The aristocrats drank and chatted happily, their conversations punctuated by laughter. The property's courtyard was impeccably decorated, shining with elegance and charm. Raleigh was sitting on one of the blue roofs of the house, watching everything from above. Unlike the guests, he was not immersed in joy, but lost in his own thoughts. Raleigh remembered the stranger's words, asking if he was still there because of something he had done in his past life. This question irritated him. He replied mentally, asking if the man thought he liked to remember those times. A long time ago, a thought had lodged itself in Raleigh's mind. He wished he had been born as a normal human being, with no memories of past lives. His exceptional skill with a sword, his immense mana, these were characteristics that intrigued those who observed him, but Raleigh considered them a burden. They weighed him down, a cross he carried in his second life, seeming all in vain. Every path he had taken was littered with corpses, as if he could feel their weight pressing down on him. He recalled Nani's question as to whether he had been to this world before. Reflecting on this, he thought it was no wonder she discovered the truth so quickly. He was always talking about his past as if he was dreaming about it, desperately wanting to forget it, but unable to stop mentioning it. From his vantage point, Raleigh viewed the world below with a heavy heart, the burden of his memories casting a shadow over the festivities. Now the protagonist felt terribly guilty for having spoken so confidently before. And now, when he had to give a negative answer, he felt like a fool. Suddenly, Nani appeared next to him, calling his name loudly, shouting right into his ear. Raleigh was frightened, not having noticed his approach. He asked Nani how she had found him, if she had used his eye despite his warning not to do so. She assured him not. She explained that she simply thought about where he might be and managed to find him. She shouted that it was true and asked him to take her word for it. Raleigh agreed, mostly wanting her to calm down and stop screaming. He was once again deep in thought. While he was lost in his contemplations, his expression was extremely sad. Nani noticed this and was intrigued by his mood. She looked at him silently and then offered him her handkerchief. After a while, they were still sitting on the blue roof, but now Raleigh was lying with his head in her lap. Raleigh asked Nani if she wasn't worried. She asked what he meant. He clarified that he was talking about the possibility of her abandoning her human form and becoming an artificial spirit. After hearing his words, Nani's hand, wrapped in dark energy, appeared just above his. She admitted that there was something that worried her. She confessed that if she became a spirit, she was afraid that the Lord would no longer want to be near her. Using her magic, she peeled an apple and explained that she felt calmer now. She told him it was because he allowed her to be with him, even though she wasn't human. This was very comforting and made her feel as if a huge weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She smiled widely and handed him the apple, apologizing for taking so long to return it. The apple ended up in Raleigh's hands. He then turned to Nani and asked her to take care of him next year too. They both looked at the full moon that painted the sky, and the girl silently accepted their request. Suddenly, the mood among the guests changed. People stopped having fun and talking, starting to look around in confusion. Donor Iris, unlike her husband, smiled warmly at the guests. People were shocked to see the Count in your current state of illness. The guests began to murmur among themselves. Someone mentioned that during the attack on the state borders, the Count was seriously injured. Apparently, that was why he decided to choose an heir. The tension in the air was palpable. Someone asked the others what they thought about the heir. Who would it be? One person said that it was obvious that it would be Lord Leon, as he was the eldest son and had made significant progress. However, someone else disagreed. They mentioned that after hearing rumors about Orley's eldest wife being kicked out of the house, they thought Mr. Raleigh might be the heir. It was also said that he had a maid who was a sixth circle mage. One of the guests laughed and joked that if they were handing out such maids, he would want one too. The conversation continued, full of speculation and gossip. As the night progressed and the tension between the guests increased, the black-haired girl listened attentively to the conversation, finding it quite interesting. Someone asked if she was having fun. She covered her face with a fan and responded in the affirmative, saying she was just curious. She stood alone, a small distance from the other guests, watching them. She commented that these so-called aristocrats were behaving more like common gossips, exchanging rumors and empty talk. She called them fools, expressing her disdain openly. This infuriated the aristocrats. Many turned to her with confused and angry expressions, and two young men asked in unison what she had just said. The confrontation was interrupted by the beginning of the speech of the Count. He and Lady Iris were on a stage, attracting everyone's attention. The Count, he addressed the crowd, explaining that they were gathered to name the heir of the Payot family. As the guests approached the stage, the Count smiled and thanked everyone for coming. Holding an envelope, presumably containing the heir's name, he spoke of his 3 sons and his efforts to fulfill their responsibilities. Leon looked confident and proud. The Count emphasized that the selection process had been fair. Raleigh, looking somewhat indifferent, joined the crowd to hear the speech. The Earl built suspense before finally announcing that Lloyd Finer Ipiet would be the heir. Lloyd, initially astonished, did not immediately understand what had happened. With a perplexed expression, he asked if it was really him. The surrounding aristocrats began to slowly disperse. Lloyd questioned why and how he had been chosen, shouting that it should have been his brother Raleigh. Raleigh, however, applauded and congratulated his younger brother with a wide and genuine smile. The other guests joined in the applause, despite having probably forgotten Lloyd's name in their discussions of the heir. Lady Iris also smiled and applauded for Lloyd. As Lloyd walked up the red stairs to the stage, people congratulated him. His father, waiting at the top, smiled proudly. When Lloyd reached him, the Count asked how long he planned to keep the guests waiting. A loud round of applause filled the courtyard of the mansion in Pellet. An emotional Lloyd stood by his father's side. The Count began to explain his decision. Many, including Leon, didn't understand why Lloyd had been chosen. Leon was below, wide-eyed and perplexed. The Count assured them that he would reveal the reason for his choice, presenting a luxuriously adorned sword to the guests. The aristocrats quickly understood the meaning. They realized that Lloyd had been awarded the sword for his active role in resolving a recent and serious incident in the capital. Leon, speechless, could only watch as the Earl held the sword, explaining that it symbolized Lloyd's bravery and his contribution to solving the problem. Someone in the crowd asked if anyone remembered the rumor about a brave mercenary from a noble family who helped put down a rebellion of fanatics. They found it hard to believe that this hero was Mr. Lloyd. This disbelief infuriated Leon. His face turned red with anger. His veins stood out, and he gritted his teeth harder than ever. The Count handed the sword to his son, praising him for doing an excellent job. Lloyd seemed speechless. Inside, someone asked if he was okay. It was Nyan and Raleigh. Raleigh responded that everything was fine, but noticed that Ian was quieter than usual. Ian admitted he was just trying to maintain his composure. Unable to contain himself, Ian exploded, saying that the sword should have been given to the young master. He asked if Raleigh agreed, to which Raleigh responded by asking if he hadn't heard what his father had said. He reiterated that Lloyd saved people, which was why he received the award. Ian reluctantly agreed that this was true. He seemed about to say more, but Raleigh cut him off, turning to say he wasn't interested in being the heir. In fact, he despised the position, finding it all very boring. He explained that the tasks assigned to the heir were tedious, involving signing many useless papers and attending Solia's palace for tiring meetings with aristocrats. Raleigh seemed tired just discussing it and said that just thinking about it made him dizzy. He raised his hand and mentioned that his mother knew his opinion, which was why he applauded for Lloyd. Ian pointed out that Raleigh was the first to applaud and asked if that was true. Riley confirmed he was just showing support and questioned Ian if he planned to criticize every little detail. Riley turned the corner, only to be abruptly intercepted by a sound. It was Leon. Leon confronted his father, demanding to know why Lloyd was chosen over him. The Count calmly asked him to lower his voice, reminding him that the guests were still present. Leon, unfazed, continued to shout, insisting he didn't understand. The Count repeated that Lloyd was honored for his heroism at Solia. Leon, interrupting, argued that he had fulfilled all the conditions of the contest magnificently, claiming to have saved many more villages than Lloyd. Now calmer, he expressed that if he were not the heir, all his efforts would be in vain. The Count called Leon by name, asking if he understood the difference between him and Lloyd. Leon was visibly angry. The Count explained that although mastering the art of the sword and saving people were important, they were not the only criteria. What mattered most to him was that his successor had a pure and good heart. He pointed out that Leon's recent outburst about his efforts being in vain if he didn't become the heir revealed a selfish attitude, contrasting sharply with the qualities he possessed. The Count valued in a leader. Leon's goal during the competition was not genuinely to save people, but to secure the position of heir that was his only ambition. He held his sword, shocked and speechless. The Earl of Ipiet explained that he had spoken with Lloyd the day before the public announcement of the selection results. The Earl remembered asking Lloyd if he had said the sword was Raleigh's, as he had seen him holding one. Lloyd admitted that he had, explaining that he had only come to Solia because of Raleigh. The Count, impressed, asked if this was true, and Lloyd calmly confirmed, insisting that everything he did was because of Raleigh. He continued to explain that Raleigh should be the heir, not him. The Count related this story to Leon, summing it up by saying that he considered choosing Lloyd again because of his kind and affectionate nature. Leon was beside himself with rage, grinding his teeth and mentally accusing his younger brother of insolence. The Count observed Leon's horrified and distorted expression and challenged him to reflect on himself, asking if he was now blaming Lloyd for everything. He didn't wait for an answer, but provided one himself, explaining that this was the fundamental difference between Leon and Lloyd. These words only fueled Leon's anger even more. Reaching the boiling point, he raised his sword and, with his eyes shining with pain and despair, charged at his own father, shouting that he could take no more. Watching this from a distance, Raleigh and Han were shocked as they did not expect such behavior from their eldest son, especially Han. Ian was about to shout at the Count to defend himself when he realized that his own sword was missing. Raleigh had borrowed Ian's sword and threw it with tremendous force. The sword cut through the air, almost hitting Leon's head. Leon realized what had happened, but his anger was so intense that he didn't care. The sword deflected Leon's attack against the Count. The Count, now more certain than ever that his eldest son had gone too far, acted quickly. He hit Leon in the solar plexus with his fist, momentarily cutting off his breathing and leaving him disoriented. The Count expressed his deep disappointment, stating that if Lloyd had been in Leon's place, he would never have behaved so badly. These comparisons only deepened Leon's misery. In a fit of fury, the Count grabbed Leon's head with great force, ordering the black sword to reveal itself. He told Leon that all his training had been for nothing and that he needed to confront what he had become. Just then, something massive fell from the ceiling, crashing down on top of him. A black palm pressed against Leon's face, causing him terrible agony. As the chaos calmed, the air around them became calmer. Leon, finding strength somewhere deep, began to regain control of his body. He still couldn't get up, but the Count stood up confidently. He looked at his son, who was crying, and gave him an ultimatum. Either he died there and now or he left the house forever. The Count, who never supported indulgences or favoritism, remained firm. A dejected and grumpy Leon stood up, muttering to himself and questioning what he had done wrong. Drained of all energy, Leon didn't respond to his father. He walked slowly down the long hallway, muttering that he had done everything for his family. As soon as Leon was out of sight, Ian approached, not bothering to ask if the Count was fine. The Count was surprised to see the mercenary hero there and asked if he had been responsible for protecting him by throwing the sword. Ian confirmed, saying he believed the Earl was in danger. The Count exhaled, relieved. The black sword lay on the red carpet, and upon inspecting it closer, the Count realized that it was not Ian, but his son, Riley, who had intervened. Riley walked down the hall, looking around and thinking that Ian would take care of the rest. Still, he felt a lingering discomfort. Riley's attention turned to something that intrigued him. He noticed a black-haired girl in a white dress. Previously, she had covered her face with a fan, but now her beautiful face was fully visible. Suddenly, the girl started looking around, almost panicking, asking where she was. Another aristocrat leaned toward him, responding vaguely. The girl then spotted Riley, who seemed amused by the situation. She glowed with relief as she ran towards him, apologizing and explaining that she was a little lost. She asked if he could help her. Riley, willing to help, asked what the problem was. The girl hesitated before finding the words. She stuttered, trying to explain what she was looking for. Riley, a little impatient, asked if she was looking for the bathroom. The girl quickly said no, leaving Riley unsure of what to do. She clarified that it was not the bathroom. Still struggling to express herself, she shook her head when Riley suggested the living room. Finally, with a mixture of playfulness and boldness, she revealed that she was looking for Lord Riley's room. Riley was perplexed and asked in disbelief, pointing to himself. The girl, clearly surprised and a little embarrassed, covered her face when she realized that he was in fact Lord Riley. She then bowed and introduced herself, saying that she was very pleased to meet him and that her name was Latrina Feliznian, a girl who rarely shows her face at official events. It's not because she's unattractive or has a terminal illness. Furthermore, there were rumors circulating that the Duke's daughter would soon be married. Riley, sitting on a white couch, calmly asked her why she was looking for him, mentioning that he had heard she was getting married soon. The girl replied that, in fact, she had received several marriage proposals, but she had not yet found a man she loved with all her heart. Smiling broadly, she explained that there was a misunderstanding, which led to these rumors spreading. His mother, Miss Iris, was sitting next to Mr. Riley. She said that was it. Riley reasoned that apparently the other false rumors didn't work, so they decided to start a marriage rumor to align with the Duke's status. Iris then asked why Latrina had come to see them. Latrina explained that this was how things happened. She had received a letter from her family and heard that she would be chosen as the family's and Palladi's heir. Of course, she had also heard that Mr. Riley had received a medal and was curious about it, which brought her here. She also asked about the fact that Joy was honored with an award, speculating that it could be a sword. Latrina mentioned that such awards were given to those who had been seriously injured or accomplished great feats. She congratulated Count Estime and therefore the Count of Ipiet, who was also sitting in the chair. Riley replied dismissively that it was nonsense and that he did not think congratulations were necessary. He said this out loud, prompting his father to step on his foot. Looking at his father, Riley noticed the angry expression on his face, clearly indicating that Riley was supposed to be a gracious host. Mrs. Iris mentally encouraged her son, aware of her husband's and her son's temper. She understood the situation perfectly. Riley, feeling uncomfortable with his mother's presence, rubbed his neck and suggested that Latrina tell him about the letter she had received from her family. Latrina calmly explained that the letter mentioned something about a meeting. Riley looked at his father, who had his eyes closed, and immediately understood who had done all this. Latrina got a little closer, asking if Mr. Riley didn't like her because she felt intimidated by his behavior. In truth, Riley did not appreciate the situation, but chose not to express it. Instead, he made a dismissive gesture and smiled, saying that it wasn't that he didn't like her. He was simply not used to such circumstances. The girl sighed in relief, saying she thought he was upset with her over their uncomfortable encounter in the hallway. She put her hands together and mentioned that first impressions usually determine everything, asking if he could give her another chance. Latrina assured him that he could simply call her Rena from now on. She reiterated that it was a pleasure to meet him, addressing him as Lord Riley. Riley responded in kind, formally introducing himself as Riley Appolita and saying it was a pleasure to meet her as well. He was starting to get bored with everything. Nani noticed someone leaving. It was night outside and she was in the yard near the car. Nara smiled at Nani and said that she couldn't stay in the house any longer, that everything had its limits and, after all, she was a mercenary. Nani looked very sad about her leaving. She asked where they were going next, only to be told. Frisia replied that in a dream the night before, she had seen the landscape of the Western lands and felt that something awaited them there. So they decided to go there with Lady Nara. Nani was worried about Miss Nani's well-being, Frisia, but the girl reassured her, saying she would be fine. Frisia mentioned that she probably knew that Mr. Riley didn't appreciate her presence, so she thought it best to leave. Nara gestured with her hands and assured Nani that this was not the case. They were very busy with their tasks and did not suspect that they were talking to an important guest. Frisia then asked how Nani was, and Nani intervened, initially not understanding what the saint wanted to convey. Before Nani could respond, Frisia mentioned that Riley was now on a date with the Duke's daughter and wondered if Nani minded that. Frisia continued, suggesting that there was a chance that Riley would marry her, leaving Nani speechless. Nara watched Nani with visible confusion, prompting Nani to explain that Riley's decisions were his and had nothing to do with her. Frisia found Nani's perspective surprising and didn't forget to apologize for getting into a sensitive topic. Nara shook Nani's hand one last time, saying that they would probably be leaving soon. Nani, imagining Riley with a stunning woman, decided she was happy just being near him. Pink roses bloomed softly in the courtyard under the bright, high sun. Riley and Latrina were sitting at the table, the protagonist reading a book while the girl drank her drink. Finally, she turned to him, looking intrigued. Latrina asked if it was true that he had never picked up a sword, and Riley coolly confirmed. This left poor Ian in shock, unable to maintain his composure. Latrina was initially in disbelief, stating that she had heard that everyone in the Ipiet family knew how to wield a sword. Raleigh, increasingly frustrated, commented that he must be the exception since he was right there. Latrina could have tried to ignore his attitude, but her servant did not have the same intention and looked at Raleigh with disdain. Suddenly, Latrina perked up and happily asked about his medal and how he had earned it. Genuinely intrigued, she calmly said that she was very interested in the story, but Raleigh remained silent. Some time later, he turned his attention to her, apologized and explained that he had been absorbed in a very important episode. Latrina's previous positivity disappeared, and she let out a forced laugh, mentioning that this was why she preferred to read. Ian felt terrible, mentally asking his teacher if he could feel the awkward atmosphere present. He truly believed that even a statue could have better social skills. He knew Raleigh wasn't particularly fond of women, but this was unexpected. Raleigh returned to his book, while Latrina watched him intently. His purple eyes seemed to understand him perfectly. She called him again, putting a finger to her lips and smiling coquettishly, offering to guess what he was thinking and asking if he would like her to do so. In fact, she didn't expect Raleigh to respond. She hazarded a guess, saying he was probably thinking about how much he hated the party and wanted it to end. She asked if she was right. Raleigh didn't quite understand her approach, so Latrina continued. She mentioned that instead of reading, he might prefer to rest since he hadn't been sleeping well lately. Raleigh was surprised and even put the book aside when she revealed that she was also being tormented by the same nightmare. The protagonist asked who it was. The girl laughed, delighted to finally have his attention, and asked if she had guessed correctly. She noted that, judging by his facial expression, she had hit a nerve and asked him not to be angry with her. Raleigh stared at her with wide eyes. Latrina explained that she felt the same irritation as him, asking if he didn't agree. Raleigh remained silent. Then she changed the subject, commenting on how divine the tea was. The protagonist couldn't help but feel intrigued. He asked in a serious tone how she managed that. Latrina, feigning ignorance, asked what he was talking about. Raleigh simply replied that he was referring to the same thing she had done to him. Latrina pretended not to understand, asking, "The same thing?" Raleigh's frustration was evident in his tone as he turned to the Duchess. The girl smiled widely, questioning if he was threatening her now. Commenting on her amused reaction, she sipped tea and talked about how he seemed idle, having never held a sword and being the subject of a lot of negative rumors. Ian thought he wouldn't have said anything like that himself. These rumors were really harmful. Latrina spoke as if she knew his thoughts, suggesting that she would share them, but not so easily. She pointed to her guard, indicating that if Mr. Raleigh was ever involved in a battle, he would inform her. The girl mentioned that several guards from her duchy had fought against him and lost. Raleigh looked at the extremely arrogant guard and asked if that was why he kept his nose in the air. Latrina replied that he was the right gentleman to bring him back to reality. She asked if it wouldn't be great if he taught her guard a lesson. If the mighty Raleigh could bring him down, she thought it might even be good for him, shouting that what doesn't kill them makes them stronger. Finally, she leaned across the table with a caustic smile and asked him what he thought, suggesting that it was a very tempting deal. Shortly afterwards, Latrina was in the red room with the Count from Ipiet. He commented that she seemed to have an idea. The girl tucked her hair behind her ear, and when asked if the Earl had said that Raleigh was hiding his power, she confirmed it. She seemed a little irritated, but the Earl's words confirmed her suspicions. This surprised the Count, and he questioned whether it was true, whether he could be mistaken, or whether it was just his imagination. The girl smiled and looked directly at the Count. She remembered leaning across the table with a caustic smile, asking what he thought and suggesting it was a tempting proposition. Raleigh seemed to lose his composure. His face contorted with anger as he asked if she was implying that his guard had become arrogant, looking down on everyone. He wondered if the guard was out of control. The guard himself was not pleased, reaching for his sword as the veins on his forehead stood out. Noticing this, Ian stepped forward, extending his hand to stop the guard, firmly ordering him to stop immediately and warning him not to attack. Ian seriously explained that they were in mansion of the Ipiet family, and such disrespectful behavior would not be tolerated there. Latrina found this amusing and intervened, telling Ian that he was as formidable in words as he was in action. She admitted that she also expected to see a fight and asked if Ian felt the same, confusing him as he was wondering how he would encourage Raleigh. A cold sweat began to run down his body. He tried to assure Raleigh that he didn't want to fight, but Raleigh was no fool. Finally, the girl commented that if Mr. Raleigh didn't like the idea, there was nothing more to do, but she would have to say something to the Count. Raleigh asked what she meant to say, not liking her condescending tone, but she just hinted. Latrina decided to provoke Raleigh further by acting as if she were deeply in love, and added that she would tell the Count that lately she had not been sleeping well, which scandalized Raleigh. She went on to say that she had also heard that Lady Arras desperately wanted grandchildren and thought that if she went with Mr. Raleigh, it would be beneficial to him. Raleigh could no longer contain himself. He was almost losing his patience when Latrina asked if the Count would be surprised to hear about this. At this point, Raleigh had to stand up and ask Ian to be his second. Ian didn't understand what was being asked at first. Caught off guard by the request, Raleigh was not interested in negotiating. He simply repeated his request for Ian to referee the fight. In front of the tall and proud guard, the protagonist decided that everything was fine. He had built up so much stress lately that he welcomed the chance to vent. The guard considered him a worthy opponent, which only increased Raleigh's determination. Raleigh took a deep breath. He knew the guard expected him to be intimidated by his stern gaze, but he wasn't intimidated. The swordsman considered the guard an insignificant threat, confident in his own abilities. He recalled a moment from a past life when a city saint, with arms raised high, had called for a brave warrior to raise his sword for their salvation as the people approached Beck. Raleigh, with his hand over his mouth, commented that he felt disgusted by the guard's attitude but could still fight. The guard, already enraged, dared to speak out against Raleigh, charging at him while shouting at him to shut up. However, to his dismay, a terrifyingly strong energy emanated from Raleigh, slowing and restricting the guard's movements. The guard was stunned, unable to understand why his body had frozen. Raleigh apologized for the inconvenience, saying he felt very ill and needed to use the bathroom. Upon leaving, Latrina, moved and surprised, stood up and shouted at him to wait, asking how he had done that. Raleigh feigned ignorance, smiling and apologizing, saying he didn't know what she was talking about. Latrina reported all of this to the Count, stating that she observed the guard's reaction and realized everything. Raleigh was definitely hiding his power. These words carried significant weight for the Count. She explained that Raleigh didn't like her request, but she liked him and wondered if the Count understood how much it hurt her. The Earl apologized, expressing his greatest interest in Lloyd. Latrina recognized that Mr. Lloyd was indeed quite capable, which is why the Earl chose him as his successor. However, she insinuated that while Lloyd was competent, he lacked spark and heart. As a favor, she requested something from the Count. The Count asked her to place her order. Latrina proposed that the invitation to the New Year celebration banquet, normally given to the heir, be given to someone else. Meanwhile, Naney and Raleigh sat on the white sofa in the living room. Raleigh leaned on her shoulder, and Naney asked how he was feeling. Raleigh didn't respond, internally berating himself for getting so excited. He had wasted so much energy stopping that fool, and now he felt even more exhausted. Naney, sensing his discomfort, mentioned that she had already heard from Ian about what had happened. She commented that Raleigh was on a date with a lady vying for his attention, but suddenly changed her mind. Naney asked Raleigh if their current situation had anything to do with the conversation they had earlier, suggesting that she thought he might be struggling with his memories lately. Raleigh didn't want to discuss it and asked her to stop, saying there were more pressing matters to be dealt with. He then summoned Eliona, and the fire fairy instantly appeared, blinking and expressing relief that he had finally called for her. As she was bored to death, Raleigh told Naney that she needed to gradually prepare herself to become a spirit. Naney acknowledged this, noting that Raleigh did not want to talk about the matter. He then turned to Eliona and asked her to explain how, where and when the transformation would happen. Eliona, delighted to be freed from boredom, enthusiastically agreed to explain. She said that due to her master's preparations, they should try to complete the transformation before next spring. While it would be possible to do this before winter, the ideal time would be in the spring, when they could find a suitable spirit for Naney to inhabit. Eliona explained that a suitable spirit would serve as a receptacle for Naney, a container of sorts. She mentioned that they needed to go west, but Raleigh found that direction too vague and asked for more details. After pondering for a moment, the fairy described a place where snow falls, the whisper of black wings can be heard, and soft music floats in the air, a peaceful and serene place. Raleigh, not liking such romantic descriptions, asked Eliona to repeat it in clearer terms. When she started to do so, he interrupted her, frustrated, and demanded a direct explanation. Eliona clarified that container was a term in spirit language to describe the receptacle for Naney's transformation. She admitted that, as a spirit, she found it difficult to express these concepts in human language. Raleigh, exasperated, asked her to speak more simply. Eliona opened her arms and explained that she was a spirit and could not change the way she communicated. She reassured Raleigh that the spirit had already been informed in advance and would be waiting for them at the designated location. Naney hugged Eliona, expressing the hope that if the spirit was strong, it would leave some kind of sign. The fairy then disappeared. Raleigh turned to Naney and asked her opinion. Naney replied that she was willing to stand by him, but she intended to do more than just that. Raleigh, deep in thought, felt a wave of sadness and lowered his head. While Naney continued to watch him intently, Eliona reappeared and mentioned that she was curious about something. Raleigh and Naney looked at her questioningly. Eliona asked Raleigh if the girl in the garden was prettier than Naney.